How's it going, everybody? I'm Dave Glavin, a prospective NBA salary cap analyst, and today I'm going to be discussing the Phoenix Suns salary cap situation, in particular where they stood coming into the offseason and where they are now after all the moves that they made. So coming into this offseason, the Suns had just set the record for the most expensive roster in NBA history and severely disappointed. They didn't even make the play-in. So it was clear that some changes had to be made. Additionally, they were headed for a financial crunch, and given the second apron and repeater tax penalties, these changes had to come this offseason. Taking a look at their finances, there were 14 million over the second apron in the repeater tax as well. So the roster was over $400 million before even filling it out with the last three guys. Given the second apron, their 2032 first round pick was frozen, as well as the trade exceptions that they had previously generated last offseason and this past deadline. They had two tradable firsts and two tradable seconds, and 10 guys on the roster, as well as that cap hold for the number 29 overall pick. Taking a look at the roster, extremely imbalanced, both financially and skill wise. You have three guys making over 100% of the cap, and they're all elite scorers, but don't contribute much else. Specifically, Durant and Beal at this point in their career are not consistent defenders, nor do you expect them to be. And Devin Booker has never shown to be an above-average defender, and really hasn't shown any signs that he ever will be. Durant's on expiring. Really, their only asset left outside of Booker. So it makes sense that he was the first one to go. Beal has a no trade clause, performed well below his average annual value, and his inconsistent rotation status made him impossible to move on this deal. Booker, face of the franchise, but one question and one important thing to note is he worth such a high percentage of the cap? There's been a trend away from score first shooting guards as your best player when they really don't contribute much else. He is an elite scorer, has been for a while, but it'll be interesting to see if he evolves his game to be more of a leader and on the other end of the court, because I feel like that'll be necessary if they have any chance of getting back into relevance. But taking a look at the moves that they made, started by moving on from the head coach Mike Budenholzer after one season. There was a clear lack of connection with the team, especially with those top three guys. We saw time after time just disagreement on the court in the huddles. So he had to go. They also moved on from James Jones, who initially moved into a senior advisor role, but is actually going to work with the league office. And they promoted Brian Gregory, a vice president, to be the general manager. They just gone 36-46. They missed the playoffs for the first time since 2020. He really wasn't able to find the right coach for this group after Monty Williams. Didn't work out with Vogel, didn't work out with Budenholzer. So it was time to move on. One important thing to note, as well as with the head coach that we'll get into in a second, but Brian Gregory has Michigan State ties. He was the assistant coach for that team in 2000 when they won the national title. HBO is a walk-on that team. So just an interesting note that this relationship has been there for over 25 years. His first move was to hire Jordan Ott as the head coach, agreed to a 4-year deal. He's been an assistant since 2012 with Atlanta, Brooklyn, the Lakers, and most recently with Cleveland. And he actually started at Michigan State as a grad assistant and video coordinator. So there's a Spartan connection there as well. The first and most major move of the offseason was moving Durant to Houston for Jalen Green, Dillon Brooks, the 10th overall pick in this past draft, and 5 second-round picks. It wasn't clearly reported, but I believe these are the 5 second-round picks that they got. 2025, Houston second, which was number 59 overall. 2026 second, which is the most favorable of the Celtics, Pacers, and Heat, but the least favorable of the Clippers, as well as a 2026 second most favorable of the Thunder, Mavericks, and 76ers, and a 2030 second round pick from the Celtics, and a 2032 Houston second. Another thing to note, Jalen Green had a 10% trade bonus in his deal. I believe most of this was waived because he only had a roughly $250,000 increase to his salary this season and next season. But it was clear the Durant and Booker duo had run its course, and after acquiring Durant and Beal, they were asset poor. They needed to recoup young players and draft picks, and they were able to do that, getting their own first round pick back and the 5 seconds, which we'll get into in a second, but really allowed them to maneuver the draft in a way that they wanted to. They're taking a swing on Jalen Green's upside. He's had he's been inconsistent for his entire career so far, but he's still only 23. This season and next season will be incredibly important to see if he can be a long-term player for them. And they really needed the defense and toughness that Dylan Brooks brings as they try to reset their culture. Ishbia has taken some responsibility for taking the wrong swing with those Durant and Beal moves, but it remains to be seen if those were a fatal blow for the organization in terms of getting back to relevance in the next 5 years. I do think the Durant deal was a great haul for where he is in his career at this point, given his injury problems and his age and that he wanted an extension. But it does not compare really at all to what they gave up for him, which was 11 or 12 first round picks worth of value when you calculate it all out. Like, they gave up 4 of their own. They gave up Mikal Bridges, who went for 5, and they gave up Cam Johnson, who just went for Michael Porter and 1. It's up for debate whether you think Michael Porter would go for 1 or 2, but at least 11 or 12 first worth of value is incredibly difficult to recoup and still build a contender after losing out so poorly in a deal like that. But with that 10th overall pick, they selected Kaman Malawach, 7'2", 250 pounds, 18-year-old center from Duke. Really like the two-way versatility that he could bring in a few years. Feel like he's still a project and is going to spend a good amount of time in the G League just to get those reps. He started basketball late, so he's a little bit behind the 8 ball there, but really like what he could be in terms of protecting the paint and rim running and being a lob threat. The next move they made was trading for their starting center, Mark Williams. They moved on from Vasilije Micic, picking up his team option to move him in this deal, as well as trading their only 2 remaining tradable first-round picks, the 29th overall pick, as well as the future 2029 least favorable first from the Cavs, Timberwolves, and Utah. To Charlotte for Mark Williams, who everyone knew was going to be on the move after the botched trade with the Lakers. Is this the guy that I'm using my last 2 tradable firsts on? No, but I understand why they did it given his value at this time. He hasn't played more than 45 games in a season in his first 3 years, but I do see the resemblance with Ayton at his best, someone that really complements Booker well. So it's a risky move, but I do see the upside given his talents. He should be a competent defender, a rim protector, given his wingspan and his athleticism, but he's also due for an extension. I doubt that that'll happen. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but definitely a risky move. The next few moves that they made were to get up to number 31 overall. So they used 2 seconds that they got from the Durant deal, the 2026 Clippers, Celtics, Pacers, Miami second with those protections on it. Use that as well as the 2030 Celtics second to get number 36 overall. And then they moved the 52nd and 59th overall pick to get to number 41. And then used the 36th overall pick, 2026 Denver Golden State, least favorable second, and the most favorable of the 2032 Phoenix and Houston second to get to number 31 overall in this past year's draft, where they took Rasheer Fleming. Listened to a few interviews with Ishbia. He said they had this guy top 20 on their board, 6'9", 240 pounds, 21 years old from St. Joseph's. Really fits what they need, long, athletic, 3-and-D wing, brings that much-needed two-way ability to the roster. I'm interested to see why he fell so far into the second round. That's something that I didn't foresee. I thought he would be a first-round pick, but I do like the pickup, as well as at 41, getting Kobe Brea, the best shooter in the country, best shooter in the draft, 6'7", 215 pounds, 22 years old from Kentucky. He's got good size, and recently can't really miss with Kentucky guards. Performed really well in the summer league. I do think he has a position on this team for at least a decade in terms of where I could see his development going. All these are highlighted in red because they were a part of the same official trade, which was actually a 7-team deal, set the record for most teams involved. But while these transactions took place on these various dates, it couldn't be completed until moratorium was over on July 6th, I believe. But that's why these are all highlighted, as they were a part of the same deal. On the 30th of June, they waived Cody Martin, who was set to make a little over $8.5 million. This was due to a lack of production for him. Really hadn't earned that average annual value, and they needed to save some money given their goal to get under the tax. They also fully guaranteed Nick Richards' $5 million salary that day. He averaged 10 and 9 with Phoenix, 10 points, 9 rebounds. Definitely brings some center depth. Kind of empty statistics, but for $5 million, he's worth that. They also signed Nigel Hayes-Davis to a 1-year minimum deal, taking a flyer on the EuroLeague Finals MVP, who averaged 17 points and 5 rebounds on some solid splits. Shot 42% from 3 this past year overseas. Remains to be seen what his role on this team is going to be, but we'll get into a projected rotation. I believe he will get some minutes. They also re-signed Colin Gillespie on a 1-year minimum deal. I really like this signing. He's more impactful. He was more impactful last season than the stats will show. He won them some games, and he's the only true point guard on the roster. So I feel like he's going to play more than people think. Signed CJ Huntley to a 2-year, 2-way contract, 6'11", 220 pounds, 23-year-old power forward from Appalachian State. He's an explosive big, showed some promise stretching the floor, shot 36% from 3 this past year. I expect him to spend all his time in the G League this season. Another big move on the 9th, signed Devin Booker to a 2-year, $145 million extension. He's the face of the franchise. I think this is a pure business decision. While he does want to be a forever Sun, I think the question is he a member of the next championship contending Suns team? He's not on the same timeline as all these young guys like Jalen Green and the rookies that they brought in this season. I don't think it's a move that takes him a step closer to raising a Larry O'Brien. And I don't think it had to be done now unless there was a lot of pressure from Booker's camp to get a deal done now. He still has 2 years after this coming year on his deal. And I think that's a really dangerous percentage of the cap to be taken up 5 years from now for a guy that is an elite scorer, but does not contribute much defensively at all unless he evolves his game to be a more competent defender. Completely understand the business side of it, though. You have to sell seats. He's beloved by the fans, probably the greatest Sun of all time, and he wants to be there, so I get it. But they're very far off from the 2021 finals team mold, where you had a leader in Chris Paul who ran that team like a general, and then you had long defensive wings in Johnson and Bridges, and at that time, a much more athletic and much more motivated DeAndre Ayton with some good depth. So maybe Fleming and Brooks fill in where Bridges and Johnson left off, and Mark Williams can fill in for where Ayton was. But I'm not a huge fan of doing this extension now. I just feel like it didn't have to be done now. The next big move was waiting and stretching Bradley Beal. In terms of how this is done, he had 2 years left on his deal. So the rules are you multiply that by 2 and add 1 in terms of how far you stretch the money. Gave them a ton of financial flexibility as they duck the tax entirely and are able to reset their repeater clock. They'll have to duck the tax 2 years in a row in order to reset that clock just based on how it works in the CBA. But he gave up $13.8 million, and this number is specific for a reason because it gives them enough room. They also have Nasir Little, and I believe it's EJ Liddell waived and stretched. Yeah, so you're only able to have 15% of the salary cap waived and stretched in dead money per season. So Beal had to give up that 13.8 so that they would get under that threshold. It gives them short-term flexibility, but I think it hinders them from any serious long-term title contention in the next 5 years. I understand the cap is going to be rising, but it's incredibly difficult to build a serious contender when you're eating $20 million a year in dead money, right? Combining that with the Durant move, the initial Durant move where they lost out on so much value, they're going to have to hope for a Jalen Green to really surge as a star in terms of being able to build a contender. They also claimed Jordan Goodwin off of waivers from the Lakers. Brings some guard depth. He's scrappy, makes a lot of hustle plays, and he's going to compete with Jared Butler, who signed an Exhibit 9 training camp deal, averaged 12 points, 5 assists with Philly last year. Interested to see. My guess Butler wins out that battle, but Goodwin did play well for the Lakers in spurts last year. So I'll be interested to see there how that turns out. In terms of where they are now post off season, they're ducked the tax by roughly $300,000. Both Goodwin and Butler on non-guaranteed deals. Goodwin has $25,000 guaranteed. Mark Williams has an extension looming. I don't think this will get done at all this offseason or at all during the season, just given his lack of availability over his first 3 years. I did see some reports about Jonathan Kuminga being a potential target, but given what the Warriors had reportedly wanted back, a first-round pick and young players, I don't think that the Suns are able to realistically acquire Kuminga unless they wanted to include a guy like Ryan Dunn, which I don't think they would do. I do like Kuminga's fit on this team, but I don't see them as a realistic target for him. In terms of guys that might be on the move at the deadline this upcoming season, I think Grayson Allen and Royce O'Neal are two names that stand out to me. They don't really fit this new timeline that the Suns are on, but Allen is valuable to really any team given his shooting, and I feel like Royce O'Neal on his contract could definitely be moved for some value. They have no future first-round picks to trade. I have that they have 2 second-round picks. I might be wrong on that. I've seen some reports that they have 3, some reports that they have 1, but I believe they have 2 second-round picks remaining. They did unlock their mid-level and biannual exception by getting under the tax, as well as their trade exceptions that they generated last year. And this one is expired. But they have 4 trade exceptions remaining that could be used for this season. In terms of the rotation, this is something that I'm just doing to try to estimate where minutes are going to be distributed in terms of what they lost and what they're bringing in. I don't think this is going to be concrete at all, but it has been reported that Jalen Green is going to be running the point guard spot. He's going to have to completely change his game from what we've seen. 1.4 assist to turnover ratio so far in his career. Really hasn't shown to be a great decision maker, great distributor. So that's make or break for him, in my opinion. Devin Booker, the starting 2 spot. I think they'll go Brooks and O'Neal at the wings and Mark Williams holding down the 5 spot. In terms of backup point guard, I have Colin Gillespie, Grayson Allen at the backup 2, Ryan Dunn, Rasheer Fleming, and Nigel Hayes-Davis making up the bench wing minutes. And I have Oso Ighodaro as the backup center. I really don't feel like he could play the 4 at all, given his lack of ability to stretch the floor. And I do feel like Kaman Malawach is going to spend a lot of time in the G League, given where he is in his development cycle. But could definitely see him later in the season taking some of Oso's minutes and maybe trumping him overall in the rotation. If Allen and Royce O'Neal are moved, it would definitely open up minutes for guys like Rasheer Fleming, Kobe Brea, if he's playing well enough in the G League, could get some minutes later in the year. I do want to talk about Matt Ishbia, who recently had an interview on an Arizona sports radio show. He talked a lot about, getting guys who are ascending, who want to be in Phoenix, fully bought into the organization. I completely get that. He's used the word superstar a lot with Devin Booker, and I feel like you should be a little careful with how that term is thrown around. I don't think he's a superstar. I think he's a star. He's an elite scorer. But to be a superstar, you have to be competent on both ends of the floor, and he really hasn't shown that defensively at all. He also said they have two young up-and-coming superstars in Jalen Green and Mark Williams. And again, maybe we just have different definitions of the word, but I feel like that's overstating it a bit. Obviously, you believe in your guys, but the last thing you want to do is lie to yourself about what you have. He was also asked about where he sees this group in terms of comparing it to the previous year. He said, are we going to win 72 games and win a title? No. But he feels like they'll be competitive and be filling seats and a team that the fans want to root for. One thing I want to note is I've heard guys like Brad Stevens talk about never wanting to put a limit on a group, and I feel like that should be applied here. You never want to set a boundary for where your team could be. Obviously, is it realistic to think that they could win a title? No, but don't even set that boundary in the first place. Their win total is 30.5 wins. I think they'll be right around there. I think their best case to play in berth, just given where this team is still in terms of its versatility. I think they'll be much improved defensively. Interested to see how Mark Williams, his health holds up, because I feel like he's a really big X factor for them. But that is the Phoenix Suns overall salary cap review. Appreciate anyone who tuned in, and we'll be doing more of these with other teams shortly. Thank you.